The troubles of India's aviation industry. What does Go First's distress call mean for the aviation sector? Why was a major section of Go First's aircraft grounded since last year? Why do airlines struggle to survive? What contributes to the high operating costs? What are the policy and the regulatory factors affecting the industry? The name of the explainer is Diksha Munjal. The story so far. After low cost carrier Go First insolvency filing last week, the Aviation Safety Regulator Directorate General of Civil Aviation DGCA on Monday, May 8th, directed the airline to stop selling air tickets immediately. The DGCA issued Go First a show cause notice for its failure to continue the operation of the service in a safe, efficient, and reliable manner, giving it 15 days to reply before the regulator decides on revoking the airline's permit to offer commercial flights. The unprecedented distress called by the airline that rebranded itself just 2 years ago raises concerns about the health of the Indian aviation industry already reeling from pandemic losses. How big is the Indian aviation sector? The country's domestic air traffic has been recovering in the past few months after being severely hit by the coronavirus pandemic. In March, domestic carriers flew 13 million passengers, which according to the DGCA was 11% more than the same month in the pre-pandemic years of 2018 and 19. As per the Civil Aviation Ministry, India will have more than 140 million passengers in financial year 2024 alone. The CAPA Center for Aviation projects India to handle over 1.3 billion passengers annually in the next 20 years. There are currently 148 airports in the country and it is the third largest domestic market in the world in terms of seat capacity. As of March 2023, Indigo remained the domestic market leader with 56.8% of the market share, followed by Vistara 8.9% and Air India 8.8%. Air Asia had 7.6% of the market while Go First was at 6.9%. Followed by SpiceJet at 6.4%. The newest player, Akasa Air, which began operation in August 2022, managed to capture a 3.3% share. Is the sector financially viable? Despite being touted as the fastest growing aviation sector in the world, airlines in the country have struggled to survive in the highly competitive and unforgiving aviation industry. While travel restrictions during the pandemic badly hit the coffers of all carriers, their financials were in the red earlier as well. While India's airlines cumulatively suffered huge losses, rupees 15,000 crore in the financial year 2020 to 2021, owing to the pandemic, losses are not a post-COVID phenomenon. In 2019 to 20, Indigo was the only airline to make a profit while all other players posted losses led by then state-run Air India at 4,600 crore. Financial trouble has led to the folding of major airlines in the past few decades. 17 airlines, domestic and regional, have exited the market. Meanwhile, the consolidation of 4 carriers including Air India and Vistara under one umbrella by the Tatas is going to make it even tougher for smaller airlines to capture the market, pointed out CAPA in its recent report. While Air India was bad for competition in its earlier state-owned version, with the current consolidation, 75 to 80% of the market will be captured by Indigo and Air India combined, leaving just about 20% for players like SpiceJet Go First if it revives and the newest entrant Akasa. What costs do airline bear? Aviation policy is broad-based in India and is dealt with by the Ministry of Civil Aviation under the legal framework of the Aircraft Act 1934 and Aircraft Rules 1937. The DGCA is the statutory regulatory authority which comes in for issues related to safety, licensing, airworthiness, and so on. While the Mother Act and rules have seen frequent modifications, aviation experts argue that India has not kept pace with modern technology in aerospace and increasing costs to the industry, which ultimately affects passenger growth. While the Indian aviation sector initially saw a boom in the 1990s after opening up as a result of liberalization reforms and the breaking of the monopoly created by Indian Airlines and Air India, by the early 2000s, only 2 major airlines that were given licenses survived: Jet Airways and Sahara. Low-cost carriers then entered the market around 2003, with diversification and lower fares being expected to promote the industry's growth. However, while no-frills brands faced intense competition to keep prices low. The government levied high taxes on aviation turbine fuel (ATF). According to estimates, while India's airfares are 15% below the break even point, heavily taxed ATF contributes to the single best expenses of carriers, amounting to anywhere between 40 to 50% of operational expenses. Some Indian states impose provincial taxes of as much as 30% on jet fuel. This also makes shorter flight routes unsustainable for smaller airlines, while big carriers like Indigo offer ultra cheap fares on routes flown by rivals using their reach to recoup costs on less competitive legs and tapping economies of scale to lower overheads. Notes a Bloomberg analysis. Indian aviation policy has also posed barriers to entry and growth while also not affecting players uniformly. From 2004 to 2016, new airlines in the country had to be in operation for at least 5 years and have a fleet of at least 20 aircraft to be able to fly internationally, which stabilizes the operations and viability of carriers. This changed with the National Civil Aviation Policy (NCAP) in 2016, which removed the 5-year domestic experience rule but kept in place the 20 aircraft fleet requirement, mandating domestic airlines to have at least 20 aircraft or 20% of its entire fleet size, whichever is higher, for domestic operations. While newer entrants to the industry like Vistara and Air Asia India lobbied the government to remove the 5 by 20 rule, legacy carriers who had to meet the earlier requirements to go international opposed the change as being bad for competition. Most Indian airlines do not own entire fleets as their financials do not allow them to shell out huge one time payments to buy planes but lease them from companies based out of India instead. About 80% of India's total commercial fleet is leased, according to PwC. However, leasing ends up adding high cost to operations as these leases of about 6 months each are denominated in US dollars. Airlines have to pay annual lease rents of about 10,000 crore rupees to lessors, making up nearly 15% of the revenues of Indian airlines except Air India, which owns a large part of its fleet. The costs of these leases go up further when the Indian rupee depreciates during short and long term global financial developments. For instance, an oil price shock, which simultaneously increases the cost of ATF, compounding the carrier's expenses. Till the government's plan to get leasing companies to set up shop in India and make it a leasing hub takes off fully, the expensive lease rents for airlines and repayments feuds with lessors are here to stay. Airlines also have to bear costs in terms of airport fees for the use of airport facilities, including aircraft landing, freight, and other charges related to the use of airport infrastructure such as runways and passenger terminals. Internationally, airlines pass on the bulk of these charges to passengers. However, carriers in India, to must remain competitive, have to offer lower ticket fares to increase reach. For state-run airports, these charges are regulated by the Airports Economic Regulatory Authority (AERA). But the recent privatization of airport operations, handing over the major airports to firms like Adani, have raised concerns about further fee hikes. There are also high costs associated with the training of airline crew. Besides, the crunch in pilots is also reflective of the inadequate number of flight training organizations. Why was Go First's fleet grounded? Recent months saw several aircraft grounded at airports, frequent mid-air snags, and cancellations due to operational reasons. As for Go First, which filed for bankruptcy at the National Company Law Tribunal (NCLT) last week, 28 of its 54 aircraft are grounded. That, it says, is due to the serial failure of Pratt and Whitney's engines, while it continued to incur 100% of its operational costs. The airline said that 50% of its fleet had to be grounded by December 2022, leading to a loss of over 10,000 crore rupees for the airline. American engine maker Pratt and Whitney, meanwhile, has refuted the claim, saying that the airline has a lengthy history of missing its financial obligations. Besides, the airline has total dues amounting to 11,463 crore rupees to its various creditors. While lessors are now rushing to take back their aircraft before the NCLT can impose a moratorium on claims, Go First is not the only low-cost carrier currently struggling with a grounded fleet. In the case of SpiceJet, its aircraft in operation are now down to about 47 to 50 out of a total fleet of 78 to 80 aircraft. Lessors have already taken back 20 of its aircraft owing to non-payment of dues. Besides, The grounding of aircraft has not resulted purely out of financial constraints. Engine and spare part issues have led to the grounding of 13% of the fleet of profit making and market leading Indigo as well. Air India also has part of its fleet grounded. Supply chain troubles in the recent past have substantially affected all major players, with industry experts calling for ramping up the establishment of the maintenance, repair, and overhaul (MRO) segment domestically. Captain G.R. Gopinath, retired, the founder of Air Deccan, points out that there are labyrinth in the taxes, customs, other duties, and torturous rules to be overcome to bring in parts to facilitate repair and overhaul and to re-export them or for use in aircraft here. The layers of costs associated with policy and infrastructural incapacity affect the viability of airlines which struggle to remain competitive.